Okay, let me see how, can everybody hear me okay? Is that a good volume? You okay, Jen? Got that? Okay. So, hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. I know it's the Cubs playing. You can ask Siri as we go along to see how we're doing. And I know it's kind of a rainy night, so thank you for being here. I know you all made a lot of effort. And I'm really glad to be with you because basically I just come to share my thoughts with you in hopes that it brings about good discussion about a really difficult topic, the topic of abortion. And I really always find the most important part of my presentation to be the question and answer. So as I go along, I think you'll realize that no questions will shock me and that it's a really good time for us to have dialogue together as a community. I'm a firm believer in the power of dialogue, and certainly my talk keeps growing and changing as I get into dialogue with people in the audience about things. So I'm going to be couching much of my talk in my story. You may recognize yourself in this talk, or at least someone you know. So I was born into a lukewarm Catholic family. What I mean by that is we didn't go to church every week, and we didn't really pray, but there was an atmosphere of faith that surrounded me, which really in a lot of ways you can't even expect anymore. Camille Paglia writes a lot about the fact that people now, even when they're in high school and later on in college, they don't even recognize pictures of Adam and Eve anymore because the Christian story is so much leaving the consciousness of people. So being brought up in an atmosphere of faith, even understanding who God was, I'm really beginning to see, no matter what kind of cafeteria Catholics we were, I'm very thankful for this. But I had a sense of God and felt like he was my friend and understood me. And then I hit puberty and, really kind of forgot about the God thing for a while, unless I saw it like Friday the 13th, part 18, then all of a sudden I was praying to God, when I'd get sad, I'd cry about my boyfriend or something. But either way, that was pretty much how I spent my teens. As Catholic, God was just kind of a minimal thing in my life. And then I went away to college, and that is where I met the boy of my dreams. He was the smartest, coolest guy I had ever met. I mean, he was an intellectual. And one day he said to me, "So, do you really believe in God? Don't you know it's just a made-up thing, an opiate for the masses?" And I mean, he was my boyfriend, and he was super cool, and I was like, wow, interesting. He's one of those atheists I've heard about. How exciting is this? So I tried to be an atheist for a couple miserable weeks. And then at the same time, once I realized that being an atheist was about as absurd as believing in God, I kind of settled into a non-committal agnosticism. For a long time, it was just like, I don't know, so I won't think about it. And that's the religion coat I wore for many, many, many years. And I actually think it's a very, very, very common religion coat for people to wear. So I enter into my 20s, and it's rife with some extremely inappropriate drama, which I will not burden you with. But I do want you to pay close attention to my thinking process, because I think it's a very common way of thinking, for young people especially. So I valued freedom above everything else. Freedom was the most important value I had. Personally and politically, freedom was number one to me. I viewed religion as oppressive and cruel. Christianity in particular. Catholicism in particular. At that time, I saw it as being cruel, oppressive. And people on that side of the fence, it's rather harsh to say, but they seemed judgmental, boring, shallow, anti-intellectual, and quite pathetic to me. I didn't want to be like them, so I wouldn't even consider their ideas as an option. To me, religious people did not seem to be engaged in what I saw as the real world. So let me first explain something a little bit about myself. I've always had kind of a freewheeling temperament, And I'm willing to call it this only if none of you politicize this too much. I've always had a very liberal temperament. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean how I'm going to vote. Like, it doesn't mean that. But what I mean by a liberal temperament, in the most simple and blunt of ways of explaining it, is that I tend to, in a knee-jerk way, prefer compassion to standards. That's kind of the most simple way for me to put it. This is a great idea, but in some ways, it's not the best idea. And I think you have to understand that everyone I surrounded myself with had the same kind of mindset. Idealistic, motivated, politically minded, with big hearts, having a desire to change the world for the better. This is a good thing. But where did this essentially good and compassionate thinking steer me wrong? And I really do believe that this is ultimately the question we need to look at today. Because though our society and a great deal of academia would like us to think so, intention is not all that matters. I remember being completely baffled by the expression, "the road to hell is paved with good intentions." It made no sense to me whatsoever. How could this be? All that mattered in the final analysis is that I had good intentions, right? I mean, it's taken me a long time to navigate this tricky moral road. But let me just tell you with all certainty that it absolutely and completely was compassion that led me to work for Planned Parenthood. I would even call it deep and sacrificial compassion. So I started off as a volunteer there and then became an employee. The way that I kind of entered into it is I was working at a community mental health center. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And my attitude about Planned Parenthood was at least they were beginning to deal with some of the sexually related issues in our culture. I really saw Planned Parenthood as taking the bull by the horns. I saw Planned Parenthood as educating our youth, informing people about contraception, and I thought that was a really good thing at the time. Teaching parents how to talk to their kids about sex without being embarrassed or shameful. This, to me, was at least beginning to address the sexual problems in our culture. Certainly, I'm a little bit different now, but nonetheless, that's really how I saw Planned Parenthood. But before I begin to tell you about working at Planned Parenthood, it would be remiss for me to lead you to believe that it was all coming from a place of compassion. I believe it also was coming from a deep-seated need to reinforce my own denial. Because, you see, I myself had an abortion when I was 24 years old. So the circumstances were quite typical for a 24-year-old girl living in my lifestyle. I was having intimate relations with my new boyfriend, and I found myself pregnant. And it was truly scary, but I knew that I was going to have the baby. And here's why. Because I felt like it was my responsibility. And although I was extremely, extremely pro-choice, I also never played the game where I was saying it wasn't a baby. That just seemed intellectually absurd to me. So I knew that I was going to have the baby, so I went to public aid, worked out getting that done, and my boyfriend was supportive. He said to me, "Okay, it's your choice," which I really think he meant to be compassionate and to be good, but at the same time, there's a lot of pressure when somebody says, "It's your choice." You know, all of a sudden it's like, it's all on me. Either way, it's all on you. He truly was trying to be kind, but I've thought a lot about that. My family would have been annoyed, but they wouldn't have ostracized me. And my circumstances supported me having a child. In the particular culture I was with, it would have been fine. I was hanging out in kind of a hipster culture. I could have worn cute little pregnancy dresses and been an unwed pregnant person, you know, hanging out in coffee shops. It would have been absolutely fine. But I was so scared. I was scared to death. The utter fear of an unwanted pregnancy. It was like my whole body was stuffed with stress all the time. I was so scared. And I was determined I was going to do it. And then I was waiting tables at the time and putting myself through grad school. And I was standing in the restaurant. And I think you have to understand, like, it was as if my body was stuffed with stress all the time. I couldn't sleep. And then I was standing there and like a lightning bolt almost hit me. And it was this thought. You can have an abortion. And I have to tell you, it was a complete relief. It was like for a moment, all the stress left my body and I felt fine. I mean, it was such a relief. It felt like I had taken like the best drug ever, you know? All of a sudden, I felt good. And it felt so good that it verged on feeling right. And then I thought, but what about the baby? And I did this thing where I just went, and I turned that voice off because the subjective convenience is so strong that it made me overlook everything else. So, I think that's just kind of how sin works, right? You just turned it off. Tucked away. What about the baby? Very, 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 very far. And I left work that night and I ran to my friend's house. And she embraced me and said, okay, because I said I can have an abortion. I'm so relieved. And she said, okay, we'll go through this together. So a week later, I had an abortion. And I was fine and remained fine for a long time. And volunteering and working at Planned Parenthood, I believe, proved just how fine I was. So please keep this in mind. The pro-choice movement is fueled by millions of women who have had abortions. It helps to keep the abortion at bay because dealing with it is psychological hell. And denial can be a nice, albeit dishonest option. So let's go back to where I was, the time when I became a bona fide employee of Planned Parenthood, because I find this time in my life to be very interesting, and I hope it's informative for all of you. So I was running a teen group. My job was essentially a simple matter of sex education at the time. I felt like I was armoring my kids with information. Obviously, I have a much different understanding now. But at the time, my work in sex education did not cause me any moral distress. So I was the only mental health professional at this particular Planned Parenthood, and they had an abortion clinic there. Now, mind you, I was never completely resolved about abortion, no matter how incredibly pro-choice I was. I was never able to say that it was not taking a human life. That seemed to be obvious. Yes, a life was being taken. I knew this for certain, but under certain circumstances, it seemed to me like a reasonable or necessary sacrifice. But I always had this dissonance in my head. And then one time, I was called down because to do some counseling for people once they find out that they're pregnant. And I was sitting with a girl, she was 16, she had just found out she was pregnant. Just found out. She was so scared. She's beautiful. She had these beautiful eyes, but she was like a deer in the headlights, And so I was there to talk to her about her options. And I said, well, you have 3 options. The first is you can go through with this pregnancy and keep the baby. That'll be really hard, but we'll help you with that. The second choice is to go through with the pregnancy and give the baby up for adoption. We're also able to help you with that here. And the third option is for you to have an abortion. And she said to me, she actually reached over and touched me and said, please just tell me one thing. If I have an abortion, am I killing my baby? I was like, well, wow, isn't that the question, So I put my head down for a second and I looked at her and I said, indeed, if you have an abortion, you will be terminating the product of your conception. And she looked confused, and she scheduled an abortion. And I was very distressed about this because I have a social work code of ethics that I take very seriously in terms of being honest with my clients, as well as, I'm a moral person. And she's looking to me. I have a fiduciary relationship with this person, and she's looking to me. I'm the adult. And I basically played a semantic trick on her. So this might surprise you about Planned Parenthood. So I ran up to go talk to my supervisor. And I said, hey, look, I'm having a really big problem with this. She just directly asked me if she's killing her baby. I think she is. And we talked about it, and it might surprise you, but she didn't throw around the rhetoric like it's not a baby. She was like, I know. She's like, but we're doing the right thing. Imagine if that 16-year-old girl did have this child. Imagine this, imagine that. And then we talked about back alley abortions and rape and women, and we spent about an hour talking to each other about it. And then I left. And I left with that same sense of dissonance in my head. I don't know, maybe it was about 2 weeks later or so, and one of the nurses came into my office. She's honestly one of the nicest people I've ever met in my whole life. But she'd been a nurse for a long time and had been working in the abortion industry for, 15 years. And she came up to my office and she said, Linda, can I shut your door? And I said, sure. And her eyes were kind of wet. And I said, what's the matter? And she's like, I don't know why I'm so upset. And she's like, I've seen this before, but it's really bothering me right now. I just saw a little hand. And she's like, no, sometimes I don't know if we're doing the right thing. And I'm like, I know. And we sat knee to knee, woman to woman, for an hour, holding each other's hands, saying, are we doing the right thing? Yes, we're doing the right thing. We're helping young girls. Other people don't want to do this, but we're going to do it because we really care, And she left my office, and the dissonance still kind of continued in my head, but we were going to do it, put one in for the team. So I truly wanted to acquire a sense of resolution, but I didn't seem to be able to find it. And at the time, I was also beginning doctoral studies at the university, and I knew that it would be great to do some qualitative research. And downstairs in the clinic, because the abortion clinic, during the week, it was a prenatal clinic, so we had these nice Ansel Adams pictures, and then we'd Velcro them off. Oh no, they were the baby pictures when it was the prenatal clinic. We'd take those off, and when it was the abortion clinic, we'd stick up the Ansel Adams, benign kind of tree scenes. So down there in the abortion clinic where the women would come for recovery, there were journals. Somebody had an idea that would be a therapeutically based idea that they would write in the journals after their procedure. And they'd never replaced the journals. So part of me was like, that is great. That is completely clean, qualitative, 8 years of journals on how women feel after they have an abortion. Awesome, my research. So I go down there, swipe my card, go into the room, and I go to sit down and read the journals. And I open them up, and there's some messages that are like, I'm so relieved. Everyone here has been so kind to me. But I begin to look through the journals, and they say things like, oh my God, what have I done? I'm terrified. I mean, like this big scratchy writing. I'm so scared. What am I going to do? I can't believe I did this. And I'm looking through it, and I was completely shocked. I had no idea. And this lump got in my throat, and I was like, this is like real writing. Like, these are real people. I had no idea that people felt this way. And then I got really concerned. I'm like, where do they go? What do they do? Who do they talk to? Like, what? So, I go up to talk to the director, and I'm like, hey, look, I'm having a problem here. Like, we have an obligation to our clients, and they are leaving here, and a lot of them are really messed up. So It may surprise you once again, but she said, you're the one with the connections at the university. Here's some money, get an intern, start a post-abortive group. So I worked on doing that, but as you can imagine, it's one of the hardest groups to reach out to, and certainly the last thing they want to do is come back. And it really ended up being impossible because they just want to forget about it, So once again, I had this dissonance in my head. And then, you know how you hear this expression that God has a sense of humor? Well, always remember that God has a very black sense of humor, because he thought it would be hilarious for me to become Catholic while working at Planned Parenthood, which, as you can imagine, is a really awkward experience. But my conversion story is a lot of fun to tell, and I always revel in sharing the goodness of God. But I'll leave those details for another day so I can keep focused on the topic of abortion, although it is really funny. My conversion story is hilariously dark and ridiculous. But anyway, let me just say that it was not a lightning bolt experience like Paul falling off of his proverbial horse. It was a slow and methodical conversion. Although there were extraordinary events, my conversion to Catholicism truly was due to the rational consistency of its teachings, though. And so it took a long time, but I loved it. I couldn't argue it, But I decided to leave Planned Parenthood, even though I considered myself to be pro-choice at the time. And I have to tell you why. It's because I was seeing a spiritual advisor. And I just always felt like, at least being at Planned Parenthood, I was the one that would bring things up. I was the one that would be at the lunch table and be like, does anybody feel weird? And sometimes people would be like, yeah, I do. But otherwise, we're just kind of like worker bees, walking around, doing our thing, doing our job. And so I felt kind of bad leaving, because I'm like, well, at least I'm having real conversations with people here. So I didn't think it was right to leave. But I had a really wise spiritual advisor who said, look, why don't you just get some distance? Which I realized was really necessary. So what of Planned Parenthood and this whole mindset that accompanies it? I mean, is the entirety of who I was before my conversion wrong? Or even worse, totally dismissible? Some of the things about me were right, and these things I'll hold on to. But this is the important distinction to make. I've heard it said that the devil tricks us not by giving us an outright lie to believe in, but by cunningly slanting the truth in his direction. I never set out to kill babies. No one who gets an abortion sets out to kill a baby, at least very, very, very rarely. People intend to end unwanted pregnancies. But intention is not everything. Despite the fact that our universities would like us to think so, it is indeed good intention that the road to hell is paved with. So I am now pro-life, which is a lot more difficult than being pro-choice. But it is right and it is correct. And the truth will set you free, even if it makes you intensely uncomfortable. So as a pro-life person, I'm here to talk about pro-choice people. Because, I don't know, maybe somebody in here is, I doubt it, but some of you may be one. Certainly pro-choice people, and probably a lot of them are in your family, and probably a lot of them are people that you love. So we really have to know what's going on with the pro-choice mindset in order to penetrate it and promote all of human life. So life is easy when I talk to those of like mind about being pro-life. It's really more complicated when I'm talking with people who are not religious and also liberal in their politics. So in an attempt to describe and potentially change the pro-choice mindset of people, let me make it clear that I am not here to defend Planned Parenthood, but I am here to put a face on it. And the face looks like this one. It looks like me. I am not an entirely different person since my conversion. Some things about me are absolutely and completely different, but at the essence, I'm still the same person. a good-hearted person seeking to do the right thing. That's the face of Planned Parenthood. There are a lot of bad people there. Absolutely. There's bad people in every institution. But at the base of Planned Parenthood and the Planned Parenthood mindset is a bunch of women trying to do the right thing for women and really believing the lie that they are. So how do we break through this lie? Abortion does not help women. It hurts women. It hurts men. It hurts people. So many of the polemics, at least honestly almost all the polemics, center around what about the woman. It's here that I'll focus today. Although I think that there is an even larger need to examine the impact that this has on men. It's far-reaching, and it's huge, and it's affecting our entire way that we go about building our society. But that's another talk. A fabulous one, but another talk. So abortion hurts women in both the global and the personal sense. So as a caveat to my own abortion story comes the part where I realized that my abortion hurt me and that it hurt me really bad. It took 11 years, honestly, 11 years. I didn't feel a thing for 11 years. And then it hit me, not unlike that day when I was waiting tables. It's like the same thing, you know, the lightning bolt hit me having an abortion. And I was standing in my mom's kitchen one day, and the lightning bolt hit me too, and it was this. You had an abortion. So I started having a panic attack. I don't know if any of you have ever had a panic attack, but it's horrific. And I'm a therapist, so I'm sitting there having a panic attack, and I'm saying, this is very interesting, I'm having a panic attack, which does not help the panic attack. You know, I can't talk myself out of it or analyze myself out of it. It was horrific on, like, intellectually and emotionally, it was horrifying. And I completely broke down. I remember going down into the basement, I didn't even know what to do, like I wrote or something. I don't even know what I did, but I cannot even begin to tell you what it's like to feel regret, remorse, and guilt and loss to the very core of your soul. And maybe some of you do know, and if you do, you're in my prayers each day. So my recovery from my abortion could take a long time to describe, but let me just say that the Lord led me to Project Rachel, a good and solid recovery program for which I now volunteer. There's many interesting things to talk about that with, but one thing I found very interesting is many women don't have an opportunity to heal from their abortion because of one very important factor. No one likes to tell us what we did was wrong. When I do work with the seminarians, when I talk to you guys there, this is one of the hard things for me to say because I never want anybody to do this incorrectly. But it was kind of a relief when somebody said to me, well, you did something wrong, and you can be forgiven for it. That's great, you know? Like, we all do wrong stuff all the time. Now, mind you, it's a big wrong, but it's a sin, like any other sin. And what Jesus does is he forgives you, you know? And a lot of times, in order to comfort people, people will say, well, you didn't do anything wrong, or it's good that you had the abortion because look at what would have happened. You know, they want to comfort you. They have that instinct to comfort you. But at the moment that somebody just said you did something wrong, okay, I did something wrong, I can be forgiven. So I'm better now, at last accepting the mercy that God so readily offers. Although I'll always carry sorrow and regret. I mean, it's not unlike having a big scar, you know. It hurts. But it isn't hindering my life. So how do we break through this lie? Abortion doesn't help women, it hurts women. And I want to give help to those who are in the pro-life movement. I mean, as you can see, I was deeply committed to the pro-choice movement and the ideals of Planned Parenthood. So I want to talk about a few factors that did help for me to confront the light. Confront the light is really what it's like. Let me talk a little bit about the principle of humility, because I really do believe it's the ultimate factor, both on my part and on the part of those who brought me to the light. Let me talk first about my own humiliation. It is harsh and difficult and feels pretty vicious to admit to myself that I was duped and I was tricked. Me, smart little Linda, was completely wrong. I was only wrong. I was like publicly wrong. I was like Miss Wrong. I was like in the newspaper holding hooray pro-choice signs, you know? And I had to admit that so much of me was wrong. It's absolutely humiliating to confront people, especially people who looked up to me. I had a whole community of people that looked up to me. I had people that really, really respected me. I had to say to people, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I mean, being pro-choice is an identity. It's an ideology. And leaving it leaves you quite naked and alone. I did not know, this might seem crazy to you, I literally did not know one person who believed in God. Like, my mom did, you know, and like some other people did, kind of. For 8 years, the only time I heard the word God is when I'd be like, oh my God. I mean, that's really seriously, I didn't have any Christian friends. Christians completely seemed weird to me. They seemed like the weird girls on the quad that would hand me cards that would say Jesus, or the people that would leave me really horrible tips and leave me a little like Jesus saves you card instead of the $5 I needed, you know? That's what Christians were to me. I didn't know any. I didn't really have any place to go, and it was so hard to admit I was wrong, and honestly, I almost wanted to avoid the truth simply so that I didn't have to eat crow like this. Actually, for a while, I remember being like, maybe I can be secretly pro-life, you know? Like, nobody has to even know. So basically, the process of becoming pro-life has made many people lose respect for me. And I don't like how that feels. So we're asking a lot of people when we ask them to be pro-life, and I can understand their resistance. It's hard to be pro-life. Now I'm painted as non-compassionate to women. And because God is just, now I'm an unrealistic, shallow, anti-intellectual, pathetic, religious person on that side of the fence. That's fine. Maybe it's taken some years off of purgatory for me, right? Right? That's how I try to think of it. My peer group had a change, and I've lost some friends. Not all my friends. That would be ridiculous for me to say. I still have a lot of my friends from that time in my life. So it's a big deal. It's an identity. It's an identity to be pro-choice. And in essence, it's an entirely new framework from which I had to learn to exist. The other aspect of humility I want to talk about is some people that were key in my conversion, and I believe that they were practicing humility too. So there was this priest, his name was Father Rem, which was down in Champaign-Urbana. And so it goes a little bit into my conversion story, but I started going to like 6:30 a.m. Mass before I'd go to work. So I was living with my boyfriend, and I would wake up really early, and I'd sneak to Mass. He'd be like, where are you going? I'd be like, nowhere. Like, I couldn't let anybody know. It was like the big secret, you know? And so I'd go to 6:30 Mass, and I mean, honestly, I hadn't been to Mass since, I don't know, I was 18. And it entirely missed me that it might be politically or at least religiously weird if I showed up at Mass wearing my big, huge Planned Parenthood badge, you know? So I'm going to like the 6:30 Mass, which is maybe 10 of the same people every morning. And I'm walking in looking funky, you know? I've got like cowboy boots on, and I'm going to Planned Parenthood, and I'm sitting down, you know? And all those, what I actually really liked was the fact that nobody tried to proselytize me. I mean, I'm sure they were freaked out. They're like, who is she, you know? But at the same time, they just kind of let me be, and that's all I needed, you know? I just needed that space. But Father Rem was there, and it was daily Mass. So he'd do these 2-minute homilies, and I loved him. And he seemed so smart to me, which was really weird. I'm like, what? You know? And so I decided to start to talk to him. So I'd see him every couple weeks, and I don't know, we started having a really nice relationship. At first it was like, so what's the deal? Why can't women be priests? Or like, what's the deal with country? But then we started talking about all this other stuff like Jesus and God and the scriptures and love. And I don't know, he was just really kind to me. And you know what else? He seemed to kind of like me. He actually kind of liked me. So we had like a real like friendship thing, And at one point he said to me in total sincerity, he said to me, Linda, I just can't understand how you can be who you are and be pro-choice. And I looked at him and I said, don't go there. Because I'm telling you, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was be Catholic. I mean, it was really going to cramp my style, right? This was going to be a big hassle for me to become Catholic. And I was looking for any reason to run. And that question right there was way too much. And honestly, I think it was the Holy Spirit that said, back off. And you know what he did? He did. He was like, okay. And we talked about the 100,000 other things, the 100,000 other problems in my life, right? And he just backed off. And basically, I felt cornered. And the response to that is often fight or flight, right? Well, he didn't give me the chance. He didn't give me the chance to fly away. He just backed off. And I think that takes a lot of humility. He wanted me to continue to listen, and I did. And it's really ironic because then, like 2 years later or something, I moved back to Chicago and I write him a letter and I'm like, Dear Father Rem, not only am I pro-life, I'm also doing pro-life talks because, once God got his hands on me, he's like, let's go, you've been wasting a lot of time. So I got to write him and just be like, thanks, thanks for your prayers and thanks for hanging in there with me. So I often think about 1 Corinthians, where Paul says, I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, for you weren't able to take solid food. And I just don't think I could take that. He needed to feed me slowly, But he prayed for me and I came around. So in conclusion, I just want to share with you a story about one of my friends, because I find it interesting. So you have to understand that I still have a lot of friends from this period in my life. Most of them still, pretty liberal and agnostic at best, but really good, awesome people. She came here to visit. We were walking around my neighborhood, and I was kind of talking pro-life because it totally baffles them. And the conversation switched to her and some ways that she goes about her life. Now, she's an extremely ethical creature herself, and she is in terms of the way that she consumes what she buys, both her food. She only buys products that are locally made and made in the United States, as well as she only, buys food from indigenous. I mean, she really lives this like very strict life in terms of how she spends her money, which I really admire. And it has to do with the food she eats and the clothes that she buys. And, I really admire it. And I cannot find any argument against it. Frankly, the only reason why I don't do it is because I'm lazy and I don't know, I'll eat hot dogs and I'll go ahead and, shop wherever. I'll shop at the Gap. Sorry, because I think like that's a cute little number. I'm just bad. And she really does. She spends a lot of money and she goes out of her way to buy things right. And I was like, I really admire that about you, and maybe that's something I need to just start incrementally changing, or maybe I need to give more thought to this. And it was crazy. That night she came over and we were eating dinner together, and she said to me, I don't know, Linda, maybe I need to think through this pro-life thing a little bit more. What? What I really do think happened is that she realized that this just isn't her big issue. This just isn't her thing. I mean, honestly, the way that she consumes her stuff is as important to her as pro-life is to me. And for her to be like, I really admire this about Linda. I might not agree with it, or I haven't thought that. I mean, I've spent years thinking about this and deconstructing it. You have no idea the amount of time I've devoted to this topic. She just hasn't. But the fact that she could take a moment to be like, let me just think about it. That's huge. That's huge. So, in conclusion, let me just say, that life in some ways was a lot easier when I was pro-life. Everyone liked me. I was everybody's friend, except for Joe Scheidler's, who I love. Joe's one of my friends now, for sure. But one thing I have now that I didn't have before is a sense of clarity. I'm no longer confused and in the thralls of a relativism that completely paralyzed me. So I pray each day for the strength to be pro-life and for the clear sense of how best to do the work of Jesus Christ, because it's not an easy job to do these things, but it is the right job. And I also pray that my righteousness and my pro-life convictions does not turn into self-righteousness, and thus I pray for humility each day. And with that, I conclude my talk. I thank you all for your fidelity to your own vocations and the things you do for our Lord, and your willingness to listen, and your work for the human person. Thank you. So now's the fun part, which is when we just get to talk, and I get to take your questions and see what you're thinking. Yeah. Pray each day for the strength to be pro-life. I don't know. Yeah, it's pro-life. No. It's probably either wrongly written here or I just said it wrong. Yeah. But thank you for pointing that out. Lest somebody makes that mistake. Yeah. Anecdotally about it, I would say most of them were single, although one of my greatest regrets, I have a lot of regrets and they hurt really bad, but one of my greatest regrets is that there was a married woman who came in, and this was her third pregnancy, and she was really doubting whether or not she should have the abortion. She was a professor at the university, and I was in counseling with her, and she didn't really know it. And when I think of it, I'm like, I could have easily talked her out of it. And here's the part that actually, I shudder to think at this, but it's the truth. I really did believe abortion was the best option. I really did. I know it's shocking to all of you, and it's very hard for me to admit, but the reason why I recommend that she had an abortion is because I thought it was the best choice. And I have to ask myself why. And it goes back to the idea that I hadn't dealt with my own abortion. I was fine, wasn't causing any problems in my life. You know, how could it be anything other than something that was okay?
Is the self-eating component to that?
I think it is hard to understand. I think if any of you have been in other situations where you go into complete denial, like it's just tucked away. You know, it's just so far away. And I mean, I knew I had an abortion and I was fine, so therefore wouldn't it be fine for her? You know? So I don't even know if self-hatred enters into it. It's just the product of denial.
I don't think it's conscious.
No, it's not conscious. It's not conscious at all. All the really scary stuff is never conscious. Yeah, back there, I'm sorry. How did I find my spiritual? Where? So Father Rem told me about some Carmelite nuns in Nauvoo. And I just, I had enough, I know it was interesting. I just had a lot of freedom in my life. And so I was like, well, that sounds really weird. I guess I'll go to Nauvoo and be quiet for a few days. And so I met Sister Clary and just liked her. And I also think it helped because I was quiet for 3 days. I hadn't been quiet in like 10 years, Here, I do absolutely think that there is a lot that we can do in terms of approaching this from a male point of view and the ways that, and there is an entire, and it's not just how men have been hurt by abortion, but I also think it has a great deal to do with men's desire to take responsibility and their need to take responsibility, and the part of them that when they no longer take responsibility for the children that they procure, then it really cuts down their masculinity and it ends up hurting them. And I think there's a real way that we can motivate men to do this in order to take that responsibility. Yes?
When you talk about...
Also, in the midst of saying I was pro-choice, I'm not saying I'm I want everybody to kill their baby. In my mind, what I'm saying, I am pro you making a choice about your body, of whether you should keep a baby, so that's how it works in my... It never works. Nobody is like, I'm pro-choice because so I wore all these shirts, or I gave my kids shirts when I was at Planned Parenthood that would say condoms are cool. There was never a shirt that said abortion is awesome. Nobody wears abortion is awesome shirts. If it were, then they'd be like, whoa, wait, what? You know, so it's this covering. It's this covering. It's this way we have of tricking ourselves. Sir? I know that I don't know the names of them. I know that there are some ministries out there that help with post-abortive fathers. But I also think there needs to be a much more proactive attempt to engage men from the beginning in terms of their fatherhood. This gets very, very, very political. I actually just talked to the seminarians the other day, and I was saying, I want to start a revolution. So if I were to start a revolution, in some ways, it ends up being hard, because when the guys talk to me about it, they say, you know, hey, I'm a guy, so a lot of people write me off. And certainly, you know, wearing my collar isn't going to make me necessarily a flag for, you know, liberal Planned Parenthood women to be like, oh, I like that guy, you know? So it's hard to kind of get that respect, but I'm like, you know, I think one way, if we approach this from a feminist perspective, which I think is ultimately how we need to go at the fight, is for men to be able to say, I think men could stand behind this. And I just tell you, it would be so exciting to see a bunch of Roman Catholic young priests saying, this is what we want. We want men who impregnate women, and then these women who have these children, we want them to be held responsible until age 18. Their wages should be garnished. Those men need to take responsibility for that child that they made when they made the decision to be intimate with that woman that night. Now, feminists, I think, would have a hard time being like, those jerks, wanting to make men responsible. There's some part of them that would be like, that's right. There's a whole piece in here in terms of being able to come at it from a feminist perspective, and how men need to take responsibility for the actions that they do and the babies that they make. So I think that there's a whole lot of ways to spin this in terms of, and men need to be responsible, because there was consent there, you know, on his part, for sure. Therese. And so she just said that we should start to talk to young girls about making sure that sexuality is attached to pregnancy. Is that what you're saying?
That we cannot detach.
Right. Yes, the burden is more on girls. Another anecdotal thing, although this is absolutely true. So I'm working at Planned Parenthood, and I'm doing all these sex ed workshops, right? Here's something that I noticed. Anecdotal, but very interesting. So a boy would come in and he'd talk about the fact that he liked a girl. And then I would say, okay, here's a condom, be careful, go. You know, I'd say more than that, but that was the general gist of the message. And then a girl would come in and she'd go, oh, Ms. Lynn, you know, I really like this guy. I'd be like, okay, you know, here's a condom, just be careful, go. And so then what I noticed is that within a week, almost all the time, the girl would be back in my office crying on my lap. Because you know what? She liked that boy. It seemed to me like a boy could go about that action and not necessarily like the girl, but it seemed like every girl had to at least like him a little bit. As much as she wanted it just to be able to be a compartmentalized physical thing, there was some part of her that actually kind of had to like him. So I was like, now that is really weird. There's a feminist problem here in which we're trying to be, I don't know, have the advantage of having a compartmental brain, which would be great because things wouldn't hurt so bad all the time. But it just doesn't work. So I think that there's ways of talking to girls about this, you know? She said that she was surprised that while I was at Planned Parenthood that I told them about the options of adoption, keeping the baby. At the time, and once again it might be surprising to you, but at the time in Champaign-Urbana, Advocate, I think it was called Provena, maybe before that, I can't remember. It was the Catholic hospital. They wouldn't take Medicaid. They wouldn't take Medicaid. So if a girl was pregnant, the one place where there was a good prenatal care on Wednesdays was at Planned Parenthood. That's how it was. And I mean, obviously that was fodder for all of us to be like, wow, the Catholic hospital won't even take Medicaid. I mean, it might be different now, but that's how it was at the time. So we did have a prenatal clinic with two very, very, very good doctors there on Wednesdays. And we did have adoption services. But I think I was never told to encourage abortions, but I really did believe that abortion was the best option. So you have to understand how I said it. I said, you can keep the baby, we'll help you with that, but it'll be really hard. That's what I really believed. To me, an abortion was like, it's easy, you just come in, you get it done. You solved the problem. Exactly. So yeah, that's at least been my experience. I don't know what it is now, but that is my experience when I was there. Hand there. So the question is, when somebody says, I don't believe in abortion, but I do not want to take the right away from somebody else. Essentially, that's coming from, I believe, first of all, believe it or not, a place of compassion, trying to be like, I wouldn't want to I don't want to take away somebody else's right. You know, there's a sense, you kind of feel this sense of dissonance. Actually, the one that I think is more common is, I wouldn't have an abortion myself, but I don't want to take that right away from somebody else. To which I will often follow up with, and honestly, I mean this as a question. You never try to manipulate people. They can smell it from a mile away. They're like, oh, great, she's going to try to talk me out of it. Simply be curious, and the curious question is, oh, really? Why wouldn't you have an abortion? Why not? I'm curious, like, if it's just the taking away of a mole, why wouldn't you do it if it's inconvenient for you? There must be some part of them. And just to ask them that question, like, well, why don't you believe in it? And it might lead them still to, well, I don't want to take that right away, but allow them that time to talk about why they don't want to take, why they don't think it's right. I found this very interesting too. So we would have the doctor would get shipped in who would do the abortion procedures. And he was honestly like a, I can't even say crabby. He was like a robot. Like he would just be like, hello. I mean, like he had no affect whatsoever, nothing. And I always thought he was just so cold. But the cold indicates that there was some sort of personality involved with it. He had no personality whatsoever. And one time when a woman was going to have a procedure done, because I would often be with them, he looked at her and he was really annoyed. And he said, it's the one time I ever saw him with any emotion. He goes, what are you doing back here? And she said, I don't know, whatever she said. And he's like, this is your third time back here. This is ridiculous. And he was actually pretty, whatever, wasn't as gentle with her. And I remember being horrified. He didn't do anything like horrible, but it was just his attitude was really bad. And I remember thinking, why is he mad that she's back? What's bugging him? This is just more money for him. If it really is just like removing a mole, like going to a dermatologist and being like, whack, getting rid of the thing, the growth, why is he mad? And I still wonder about it. That's the only time I've ever seen the man have emotion. So I'm like, what's going on there? What's going on there? So when people say that they don't want to take away the choice from people, I do believe that they really mean it. And they have to really grapple. I mean, I still grapple with that. And I would imagine some of you grapple with that, which is, what about the person? Don't you worry a little bit about the person?
I worry about the baby, because I think the baby's a person.
Okay, so do you worry?
I don't see it the same way you do.
You worry about the baby. Do you worry about the woman? You don't?
Yes, because of the effect it has on. Yeah, because
Sure.
of the long-term effect, the abortion. I mean, I know people who've had abortions, and it ruins their lives. I mean,
No, but I mean, do you also have concern? I mean, you're concerned
I'm
about
not
the
a
baby.
Marxist, so I'm concerned about everybody, but I believe everybody has a soul, and I do not call it pro-choice, I call it pro-abortion. Sorry.
Okay, so one other comment, then I'll grab you, Jen. So I think what you have to realize is that people, when you look at the psychology behind people and how they change their mind, if you're interested in changing people's minds, people don't change their mind because you bark the truth at them. It's just not how it works. And so even though you have the truth, I agree, you have the truth. That is rock solid like this. The way human psychology works is it doesn't work just, you have to be more than right. You have to be effective. Cardinal George used to say that to me all the time. So being right is not enough. You are right. That is an objective fact. You also have to be effective. The only way to be effective is to truly know what the other person is thinking. The other person is not, some of them are, but most of the other people are not the devil incarnate. They are just misguided. You've got the truth on your side. You've got to figure out what wire went wrong, and work from it that way. Exactly. So I do want to make it absolutely clear that as the conversation goes on, you understand that it's a false dichotomy in the idea that truth and compassion are two different things. It's even the way they talk about it in seminary life. There's the doctrinal priests and the pastoral priests. Like what? What does that mean? Does it mean the pastoral priests have no doctrine and the doctrinal priests have no sense of compassion? No. The truth is the truth is the truth. But there's really smart ways of delivering it that are pastorally, informed, and there's really ineffective ways of doing it. So I do think that that's a false distinction. But we have to learn from each other. We have to learn from each other. Some people, as I said, are going to have more of a knee-jerk reaction to just want to be compassionate, which isn't compassionate at all. Compassion without truth, it's not even compassion, it's bleh, But at the same time, if all you have is the truth and you come in with it with like a blunt object, and you're throwing anger behind it and disrespect and not having love and not doing the hard work of a relationship, that's problematic too. People have to really, really, really work hard. And I think in some ways when you do have the truth, you have to work even harder. You have to work even harder because really the responsibility is on you, So was there a hand over here? And the question is, was there ever a fourth option of go and talk to somebody in your religious community? No. No. Like I never even would have even considered that. I can't even say that they told me not to say it. I was just like, yeah, no, it wasn't part of my culture at all.
Back to the doctor.
Did I ever ask the question, what about the male? Nope. Never did. As far as I was concerned, it was absolutely and completely her choice. I didn't care whatsoever. It was her choice. That was definitely where I came from. I don't want to keep people too long, so I'll take another 2 questions, and then if we want to stay, we can continue to talk. I just want to let people go if they want to go. So, I'm telling you, I want to. Yeah. So please understand, what seems so glaringly obvious to you, is not glaringly obvious to other people. It isn't. So there's a burden that comes with the truth. You have been set free, Maybe it's because you're really smart, Maybe it's because it's grace. Maybe it's because it's your upbringing. But whatever it is, you have been given the gift of truth. Rock solid truth. When that woman, and that horrified me too. That horrified tons of people. That was a great moment because even the most diehard liberal friends I have are like, that was really creepy. Then they're asking me, they're like, was it really like that at Planned Parenthood? I'm like the expert, And so I'm like, I could see, I didn't go that far down the road. Like I had nothing like that happen. I don't think I could have talked that way, but I could see that in a weird way, it becomes this really distant thing. You get really clinical. About things. And it keeps it away. And I do absolutely believe that the psychological burden that comes from killing your child, because that's psychologically unbearable. It's absolutely psychologically unbearable. But at the same time, it keeps it at bay. And you know what? You've got a lot of other women around you saying, you're right, it doesn't matter. You're right, it doesn't matter. And as more and more and more women have this procedure done, and they're more and more and more committed to it, and what are you gonna do? Walk up and be like, you should feel really bad because you had an abortion. She's just gonna dig in even harder. I mean, we have a lot of hard work to do, but I'm saying we got to fight smart. We've got to fight smart because there's no way that you could approach somebody like that. And the pro-life movement needs to get smart about it. It's just the devil. He'll lose. Don't worry, he's lost. But nonetheless, we got to be smart about what we're doing, Father. Right. So his question was, when I worked at Planned Parenthood and there would be people outside praying, what was the effect that it had on me? I can tell you my experience. One, it was just incredibly weird for me to, see men who were up in the morning, young men up in the morning who weren't like sleeping all day or playing video games. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Well, they're guys, they care about something? So that was enough to kind of tweak my interest in and of itself, that there were guys doing something. And then secondly, now this is me. I can only say it's me. A part of me was like, wow, they really believe in what they're doing. I like people who believe in what they're doing. I believe in what I'm doing. So I would walk up to them and I'd be like, hi, you keep praying for what is right, and I'm going to go. And I said it really nice. I wasn't being, I really meant it. I'm like, you keep praying for what you think is right. I'm going to go do what I think is right. But they kept praying. And sooner or later, I did walk to their side. So I liked that. What I didn't like, what was hard on me, was the really angry guy. I mean, he was just scary to me. You know what I mean? He had the big sign or whatever. And I mean, he was just mad. And if anything, we'd walk in and that just made us dig our heels in more. We're like, I'm not going to let that guy tell us what we're, it really didn't work well. But I had a really good feeling about it. I was never there when they did 40 Days for Life. I wasn't there during that time. Yeah. I liked your comment there that it's easier to be angry about stupidity than compassionate about stupidity. Do you all agree with that? Yes. So then, who's stupid? Pro-choice people. Don't be angry at them. Be compassionate about it. Do the same thing. It's easier to be angry at stupidity than it is to be compassionate about stupidity. I think that that's an important point. Yeah, compassion is, it is. It's just messier. Hatred's, it's self-righteousness. It's the prayer I do at the end of my talk. May my righteousness, which I have been given as a gift from God, not let the devil get me, and it turns into self-righteousness. Because, man, when I face St. Peter, and he says, I gave you the truth, and you became self-righteous about it? I mean, if you ever go to Marytown, which I do quite often, what do they have? They have a big picture of heaven, right? Who's in the flames of hell? You ever notice? There's a whole bunch of priests and nuns in there, at the bottom. And I just hope I'm not that person.